The sun bled across the desert like a wound that wouldn't close. The air shimmered with heat, carrying the scent of gunpowder, blood, and dust. Somewhere in the distance, vultures circled, black specks against the burning sky. Beneath them, an Apache warrior crawled, each movement leaving a crimson trail on the sand. Chief Taza, once the proud leader of the White Mountain Apache, had seen the world fall apart in a single afternoon. The cavalry had come at dawn, riding hard, rifles gleaming, their blue coats flashing in the sun. His warriors fought bravely, but they were outnumbered 10-1. Smoke, screams, the thunder of hooves, it all blurred into one long nightmare. Now, Taza was the only one left alive. He pressed a hand to his side, feeling the deep, burning wound where the bullet had gone through. His vision swam, but he kept moving. A warrior didn't die crawling, not while breath still lived in his chest. Somewhere he knew the spirits were watching, his ancestors, his wife, his unborn son who had never drawn a breath. He would not meet them crawling, but death was close. By late afternoon, the desert had turned cold and gold. The horizon shimmered, and there, like a ghost, he saw a shape, walls, a cross. An abandoned mission house, sun-bleached and silent. He staggered toward it, half-conscious, his blood dripping into the dust. Inside, the air was cooler, the stone walls cracked with age. He collapsed near an altar covered in cobwebs, his breath shallow, his strength gone. When his eyes closed, he thought he saw her, his wife, Lani, smiling sadly, reaching for him. He whispered her name once, then darkness took him. When he woke, there was light. A candle flickered beside him, and a woman's voice hummed softly somewhere in the shadows. He tried to move, but pain flared through his ribs. "Don't," the voice said, calm but wary. "You'll open the wound again." He turned his head slowly. A young woman knelt beside him, rinsing a cloth in a bowl of water. Her dress was simple, faded calico patched at the sleeves. Her hair was pale brown, tied back in a loose braid, her face drawn but kind. She couldn't have been more than 20. "I found you outside," she said. "Thought you were dead." He studied her, those blue eyes, the trembling hands that hid their fear. A settler, alone, dangerous. But her eyes did not hold the hatred he expected. "Only pity. Wyatt, help me?" His voice was rough, cracked like dry earth. "Because you're dying," she said simply. "And I don't like watching anything die." She cleaned his wound carefully, her fingers gentle despite her trembling. He could feel her heartbeat in the air, fast, uncertain. When she was done, she covered him with an old blanket. "What do they call you?" he asked after a moment. "Clara," she said softly. "Clara Monroe." He nodded weakly. "I am Taza." Silence filled the small room, thick with the sound of the wind outside. Clara poured water into a tin cup and lifted it to his lips. He drank slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "I should have left you," she admitted. "The army calls your people murderers." His cracked lips twisted in something like a smile. "And what does your army call what they do?" Her eyes dropped. She had no answer for that. As night fell, he began to tremble, fever taking him. He whispered in Apache, words Clara couldn't understand, but one phrase came again and again. Child, legacy, spirit. She wiped his brow, listening to the rhythm of a dying man's dreams. When he woke again near dawn, he was weaker still. He could feel the end coming, like the chill of a shadow before sunset. His tribe was gone, his bloodline fading with him. He looked at Clara, sitting near the fire, her face lit with quiet sorrow. In that moment he knew what he must ask, not for himself but for his people. Summoning the last of his strength, his voice broke the stillness. "Before death takes me, would you accept to carry my seed?" The words hung between them, heavy as thunder. Clara froze, the ladle slipping from her hand, water spilling across the dirt floor. She turned to him slowly, her heart pounding. Not sure if she had heard right, or if she was staring into the eyes of a dying man's final prayer. And in that moment, the destiny of two worlds began to entwine. The question hung in the air like the echo of a church bell that refused to fade. Clara stared at him, at the dying Apache chief whose voice had cracked not with pride but with pleading. The candlelight trembled across his face, bronze skin slick with fever, eyes deep as midnight, and a pain so raw that it made her throat tighten. "Carry your seed?" she whispered, unable to believe what she'd heard. Taza didn't flinch. He simply looked at her, the firelight catching the scar along his jaw, the mark of a man who had survived too much. His voice was barely more than breath. "My people gone." My bloodline ended. My wife, she died with child. If I go too, all that we were dies with me. I ask not for love, but for legacy. His chest rose and fell with effort, each breath sounding like gravel dragged over stone. Clara's hands trembled. She wanted to turn away, to say no, to tell him he was mad. But she couldn't. Something in his eyes held her. Something ancient, noble, sorrowful. She stood and moved away, pacing across the cracked floor of the mission. Outside, the wind howled through the old wooden beams. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady herself. For years, Clara Monroe had lived with ghosts. Before the war, she'd been the daughter of a rancher in southern Arizona, a bright, laughing girl who sang at the piano and believed the world was safe. Her father had been kind, her mother gentle. They'd had land, cattle, and a small white house with lilac vines climbing the porch. She'd been promised to a man named Daniel, a soldier stationed nearby. Then came the raids. Not from Apaches, though settlers blamed them, but from outlaws who used the chaos of war to take what they wanted. They'd burned her home, shot her father, and left her mother to die beside the well. Daniel never returned from the fighting. The army moved on, and Clara, barely 19, had been left to bury them all with her own hands. After that, she'd wandered until she found the abandoned mission, a place no one else wanted, standing between the desert and the mountains. For months she'd lived there, surviving on dried beans, rainwater, and loneliness, and now this man, this Apache chief, had crawled out of the desert, dragging her back into life with a question that tore at everything she believed. She turned back toward him. He was watching her still, his eyes steady though his body trembled. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "You're my enemy. Why would you ask me for this?" "Because you are here," he said simply. "Because you have mercy. Mercy." The word cut through her. He coughed then, the sound wet and painful. She rushed to his side instinctively, wiping the blood from his lips. His hand, rough and scarred, caught hers. His touch startled her. It was warm, alive, desperate. "Do not fear me," he said. "You are not my enemy. The land made us fight, not our hearts." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe there could be something pure left in this broken world. But the thought of what he was asking, what it meant, terrified her. She stayed beside him that night, tending the fire, watching the rise and fall of his chest. Fevered dreams took him again. He murmured words in Apache, names, prayers, songs that sounded like sorrow wrapped in rhythm. She caught one name again and again, Lonnie, his wife, she realized. When dawn came, she walked outside. The desert was still and vast, painted in soft gold and rose. She knelt by the dry earth and whispered to the wind, "What do I do?" The wind offered no answer, only the sound of her own heartbeat. When she went back inside, Taza was awake again. His eyes were clear this time, his strength fading but his will steady. "You don't have to answer now," he said quietly. "But before the sun dies, my breath will go with it." Clara stood frozen. She looked at the man who should have been her enemy. And yet all she saw was a dying soul begging not for himself, but for the memory of his people. In that moment, she felt her heart shift just a little, like the earth before rain. She didn't yet know if she would say yes. But she knew one thing. She could no longer see him as the monster she'd been taught to fear. All that day, Clara moved like a woman divided. Her hands busied themselves, fetching water from the well, grinding the last of the cornmeal, mending a tear in her dress. But her mind was a storm that wouldn't quiet. The Apache's words echoed through her skull like the toll of a slow bell. "Before death takes me, would you accept to carry my seed?" Each time she thought of it, her chest tightened. She'd seen Apache raids as a child, heard of settlers killed, of girls taken. Yet here was their leader, not demanding, not conquering, but pleading. As the sun rose higher, she kept glancing toward the small room where Taza lay. He hadn't moved much since morning. The fever had taken hold again. His breaths came shallow and ragged. From time to time he murmured words in Apache, soft, rhythmic, mournful, like prayers meant for no human ear. By noon, Clara couldn't stand the silence any longer. She stepped inside, carrying a cup of water and a scrap of bread. Taza's eyes fluttered open. He looked at her with that same calm, ancient gaze that seemed to pierce through her. "You should eat," she said, kneeling beside him. He smiled faintly. "Not hungry. The spirit eats what is left of strength," she frowned. "Don't talk like that. You're not dead yet." He turned his head slightly toward the window where sunlight fell in pale stripes across the floor. "I know death," he said quietly. "He waits just outside. I can feel his shadow." Something in the way he said it, without fear, without anger, made her throat tighten. He reached a trembling hand toward the small leather pouch on his chest. From it he pulled a pendant, a thin piece of eagle bone carved with tribal markings, and placed it in her palm. "This," he whispered, "was meant for my son." Clara looked down at the pendant, feeling its smooth, worn edges. "Your wife?" she asked softly. "Lonnie," he said. "She carried our child when soldiers came. They killed her, cut the life from her belly. I swore the line of Taza would live again. That is why I ask." The room felt smaller suddenly, filled with his grief. Clara closed her fingers around the pendant, her eyes stinging. "I don't know what you expect from me," she whispered. "I'm no wife. I've buried everyone I ever loved. I've got no place, no kin, no hope left." He studied her, his eyes softening. "That is why you understand." For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the dying fire. When afternoon bled into dusk, Clara went outside to gather wood. The desert was cooling, and the sky burned orange and violet. She knelt near the dry grass, her thoughts racing. Could she do what he asked? To carry his child? To birth a life that would forever be marked by both her world and his? It would mean shame, exile, danger. The settlers already whispered about her isolation. If they learned she'd lain with an Apache, and yet in the hollow of her chest a strange warmth flickered. What if this was what she was meant for? Not just to survive, but to give something back to life itself. To honor both his dying courage and her own loneliness with a single act of creation. When she returned to the mission, night had fallen. The candle burned low. Taza lay still, his breathing slower now, eyes half closed. She knelt beside him, the weight of the pendant still warm in her hand. He opened his eyes and met hers. "Have you decided?" he asked, voice weak but steady. She swallowed hard. "I don't know what will happen. I don't even know if I can forgive this world for what it's done. But I know what it means to want something to live on after you're gone." Taza's eyes softened, and for the first time she saw peace in them. "Then you understand my heart," he said. Clara nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "If it means your spirit can rest," she whispered, "then yes. I'll carry your seed." Taza closed his eyes, a faint smile touching his lips. "The Great Spirit will bless you," he murmured. That night, as wind rattled the old mission walls, Clara lit a fresh candle and prayed, not for forgiveness, but for strength. She didn't know what the dawn would bring, but for the first time in years, she felt purpose stirring in her soul, as if life itself had reached out from death's shadow to take her hand. The candle's flame trembled against the cracked walls of the mission, painting gold light over stone and shadow. Clara sat beside Taza, her heart pounding so loudly it almost drowned out the wind moaning through the old beams. She didn't know what she was about to do, only that something inside her had already chosen. Taza lay on the blanket near the fire, his skin glistening with fever. Yet when she looked into his eyes, the sickness seemed to fade, replaced by a calm that reached deeper than pain. His gaze was steady, reverent, not pleading anymore. "I have nothing to offer you," he said quietly, his voice the faint echo of thunder across the desert. "No gold, no home, not even life. Only a promise that your name will be carried in my blood song." Clara shook her head, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "You don't owe me anything. I know what this means for you. It's not a debt, it's mercy." He frowned slightly as though the word mercy carried pain with it. "Among my people, mercy is not pity," he said. "It is honor. You give life to what was lost." She didn't answer. She only reached out and touched the pendant still lying against his chest, the carved eagle bone that had once belonged to his wife. He closed his hand gently over hers. Their fingers met, warm and trembling. For a long time they said nothing. The air was thick with silence, and the stars beyond the mission roof burned bright, indifferent witnesses to what was about to happen. Taza spoke first. "This night is not for sorrow," he whispered. "It is for the spirit's journey. When my breath leaves me, part of me will remain in you. In what comes after?" Clara swallowed hard. She wanted to say something, to comfort him, to tell him he would not die, but she couldn't lie. His skin was too pale, his lips too gray. She could feel death circling like a hawk. She leaned close, brushing a damp lock of hair from his forehead. "Tell me," she said softly. How your people say goodbye." He looked at her a long moment, then began to hum. It was not a melody she recognized, low and slow, more like the rhythm of the earth breathing. The sound filled the room, strange and sacred. Clara closed her eyes, letting it wrap around her. And when the song faded, she knew what she had to do. She moved to his side and helped him sit upright. His body trembled from the effort. The firelight threw shadows across his strong shoulders. The scars of battle etched deep like lines of history. He looked at her not as a man looks at a woman, but as one soul looks at another. "Are you certain?" he asked. "You will carry more than my blood. You will carry my people's burden." Clara's voice shook, but her eyes were clear. "I'm not afraid." What followed was not the act of strangers, nor even lovers. It was a vow, a sacred exchange between two broken souls who found peace in the space between life and death. There was no passion in it, only reverence. His hands were gentle, as though she were something holy. Her touch was steady, as though she were trying to hold back the night itself. When it was done, he held her hand against his chest, feeling the last faint beats of his heart. "When he comes," Taza whispered, his breath shallow, "name him Kohana. It means swift as the wind." Clara nodded through her tears. "Kohana," she repeated. "I'll remember." He smiled faintly. Then, reaching weakly, he removed the necklace from his throat and placed it over hers, so he will know where he came from. The fire crackled softly. The desert outside was silent, as if the world itself paused. By the time dawn painted the horizon pink and gold, Taza's breathing had grown shallow. Clara held him close as his eyes began to drift shut. "Go," she whispered. "Find them. Your wife, your people. They're waiting." His lips curved into the smallest smile. And then, with the rising sun spilling through the doorway, Chief Taza of the White Mountain Apache took his final breath. Clara laid him gently back upon the blanket and wept until her tears turned to silence. Then she dug a grave behind the mission, beneath an old oak tree whose roots drank from the desert's hidden springs. She placed the eagle feather from his hair atop the mound and whispered a prayer in both tongues, the Lord's and his. And when the wind rose, it carried her words away into the sunrise, a promise kept, a legacy begun. The weeks that followed blurred into a strange, quiet dream. The mission, once echoing with the sound of his cough and voice, had fallen silent again. Yet it no longer felt empty. Something of Taza lingered, in the way the wind moved through the rafters, in the scent of the sage she'd burned over his grave, and in the necklace that rested warm against her skin. Clara spent her mornings tending to the small patch of earth behind the mission, where wild cactus flowers grew among the rocks. She kept the grave neat, laying stones in careful rows as though each one was a word in a prayer. She didn't speak of him aloud, she didn't have to. His spirit was everywhere. Sometimes she imagined him watching her, his deep eyes calm, his voice carried by the wind. "You are the keeper of what comes next," he had said. At first, she didn't understand what those words meant. Then one morning, while drawing water from the well, she felt a sudden weakness steal through her. The bucket slipped from her hand, splashing water across her boots. She steadied herself on the edge of the well, breathing hard. The world tilted and a strange warmth spread through her chest and belly. A few days later, the sickness came, gentle at first, then constant. She would wake at dawn with nausea curling in her stomach, her body heavy and aching. It took weeks before she dared to speak the thought aloud. She was with child. For a long time, she just sat on the floor of the mission, her hands pressed against her abdomen, her heart pounding. It was impossible and yet perfectly true. The life Taza had asked for, the one she had promised, now stirred within her. Tears filled her eyes. Part of her wanted to laugh. Another part wanted to run. What had she done? What would she tell the world if the world ever came calling again? The settlers already whispered about her, the crazy widow living alone near Apache country. If they ever found out she carried an Apache's child, they'd burn her out, maybe worse. For 3 nights she didn't sleep. She sat by the fire, clutching the eagle bone necklace, whispering prayers into the flames. "Lord, what do I do? He asked me to carry his seed, but I never thought I'd have to raise it. Alone." But as the nights passed, fear slowly gave way to something else. Something quieter, deeper. When she placed her hand over her belly, she no longer felt terror. She felt life. And that life pulsed strong and steady, as if reminding her that love could outlive death and hope could bloom even in the ashes of war. One evening, she walked to the oak tree where Taza lay buried. The desert wind was cool, carrying the scent of rain. She knelt, brushing the sand from the stones she'd placed there. "I think I understand now," she whispered. "You didn't just want a son. You wanted a bridge, something that belonged to both our worlds." The wind stirred, rustling through the grass. For a moment she thought she heard his voice. "He will walk between two fires and neither will burn him." That night she dreamt of Taza. He stood in the desert, whole and strong, holding a small child in his arms. When he turned toward her, the child reached out and smiled. Clara woke with tears streaming down her face and her heart full of peace. From that day on, she began to prepare, not for fear, but for life. She mended her roof, stored food, and gathered herbs. She sang while she worked, sometimes in the soft hymns of her childhood, sometimes the wordless hum she'd heard from Taza before he died. Months passed. Her belly grew round, her step slower, her voice steadier. When she looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror, she barely recognized herself. There was strength there now, something she'd thought had died long ago. And every night, before sleeping, she touched the necklace and whispered, "Kohana," the name carried through the stillness, a promise between two worlds, one of earth and one of spirit. She didn't know what trials lay ahead, but she knew this. The child she carried was more than flesh and blood. He was legacy. He was love reborn, and no matter what came, she would keep him safe. Winter came softly to the desert that year. The nights turned cold, the wind sharp as a knife, and yet Clara felt warmth within her like an ember that never went out. Her belly had grown full and round. Each time the child kicked, she whispered his name, Kohana, swift as the wind. When the pains came, there was no one to help her. She labored through the long night alone, clutching the edge of her bed, whispering both Apache prayers and Christian ones, not caring which god listened. The desert thundered outside, rain striking the roof like the beating of drums. And just before dawn, amid the scent of wet earth and the cry of coyotes in the distance, Kohana came into the world, dark-haired, strong-limbed, and loud enough to wake the spirits. Clara held him against her chest, tears of relief spilling down her cheeks. "You're real," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "You're really here." His skin was bronze like Taza's, his hair black as midnight, but his eyes were her own shade of gray-blue, like a storm waiting to break. When the storm outside faded, she wrapped him in a wool blanket and rocked him beside the fire. For the first time since her family's death, she didn't feel alone. The months that followed were hard, but Clara never complained. The mission became a home again, its walls echoing with laughter and the soft gurgle of a baby instead of silence. She hunted rabbits with her old rifle, grew beans in the dry soil, and taught Kohana to smile by making faces until he giggled. Sometimes, when she watched him sleeping, she would imagine Taza sitting nearby, watchful, proud, his spirit always near. But as Kohana grew, so did the danger. The nearest town lay 20 miles east. Clara went there rarely, only when she needed salt, soap, or thread. At first, the townsfolk had tolerated her silence and solitude. But once she began bringing the child with her, whispers started. "He's too dark," one woman muttered. "Looks like Apache blood," said another. And someone spat on the ground as Clara walked past, clutching her boy close. She tried to ignore them, tried to live quietly. But prejudice is a fire that spreads fast in dry country. Men began to ride near the mission more often. Settlers, hunters, soldiers. They didn't come close, but she saw the dust trails, the glint of rifles in the sun. One afternoon, a soldier stopped by while Clara was chopping wood. He was young, sunburned, wearing the blue of the cavalry. "Ma'am," he said politely at first, "there's talk that you've been harboring Apache kin." Clara wiped her brow with her sleeve. "You can see for yourself, soldier. It's just me and my boy." His gaze slid toward Kohana, who sat on the steps holding a carved wooden horse. The child looked up, curious, unafraid. The soldier's jaw tightened. "He ain't yours," he said flatly. Clara's voice turned to steel. "He's mine in every way that matters." The soldier stared at her for a long moment, then spat in the dirt. "Keep him close, lady. Folks around here don't take kindly to your kind of mercy." When he left, Clara gathered her son in her arms and held him until night fell. She realized then that she could no longer hide forever. Kohana's face, his skin, Even his quiet grace all marked him as different. Yet there was beauty in that difference. By the time he could walk, he would follow the birds, chase the wind, and touch every leaf as if it whispered secrets to him. He was curious, fearless, and oddly solemn for one so small. He loved the rain and hated shoes. When he laughed, it was like the sound of water finding its way through stones, bright, soft, unstoppable. Sometimes Clara would catch him standing at Taza's grave, staring as if listening. Once she asked him, "What do you hear, my heart?" Kohana had pointed to the wind and said, "The one who sings to me." Her breath caught. She knew without doubt that Taza's spirit watched over them both. But peace in such a land never lasted. One morning when the desert sun rose blood red, she saw dust clouds on the horizon again, riders coming fast from the east. Soldiers or worse. Clara gathered Kohana close, her heart pounding. She knew the time had come when she could no longer hide her son's heritage, or her own courage. For her child was of two worlds now, and both would soon come calling. The riders came with the dawn, their silhouettes sharp against the rising sun. Clara stood on the porch with Kohana on her hip, the sound of hooves trembling through the dry earth. She didn't move, not when dust filled the air, not when the first rider's outline grew clear. But when the leader raised his hand, she froze. The man wasn't a soldier. He wore long hair bound with leather, a breastplate made of bone, and the fierce, proud markings of the Apache. For the first time in years, Clara saw men who looked like him, like Taza. The riders halted 20 feet away. The leader dismounted slowly, his eyes scanning her from head to toe before resting on the child. His gaze softened, but only for a breath. "You are the white woman," he said in heavily accented English. "The one who lived with Chief Taza before his death." Clara's throat tightened. "Yes," she whispered. He stepped forward, his shadow falling over them both. "I am Nantan, brother of Taza. We have searched for his blood since the day he died." Kohana hid his face against her neck. Clara felt his small fingers clutch at her collar, trembling. She tightened her arms around him. "He's just a child." Nantan's eyes gleamed. "He is Taza's son." The men behind him murmured softly in Apache, their faces unreadable. Clara caught fragments of words: spirit reborn, chief's blood, heir. Nantan turned back to her. "It is right that he come with us. He is one of us. He will learn the old ways, the tongue of his father, the songs of his people." Clara's heart thudded painfully. "He's mine too," she said, voice cracking. "I raised him when no one else would. I carried him when your people were gone." Nantan studied her silently. Then he said, "The blood of two worlds cannot live in only one. The boy must know both, or he will belong to neither." Tears burned in her eyes. She wanted to argue, to fight, to hold her child and never let him go. But somewhere deep down she knew the truth of his words. Kohana was of two worlds, born of love that defied the boundaries of race, war, and faith. "What if he doesn't want to go?" she asked softly. Nantan tilted his head toward the boy. "Then let him choose." Clara knelt, setting Kohana on his feet. "Sweetheart," she whispered, brushing his hair from his face. "These men, they're your father's people. They've come a long way to see you." Kohana's gray-blue eyes darted from his mother to the tall warrior before him. Then slowly he stepped forward. He touched Nantan's hand, small fingers resting against dark skin. "You knew my father?" he asked, his voice small but steady. Nantan nodded. "Yes, little one. He was a great man, strong and wise." "You have his eyes," Kohana's lips quivered. "Mama says I have hers." The Apache warrior's stern face softened. "Then you are blessed twice." Clara swallowed hard. The wind picked up, rustling the mesquite and scattering dust around them. For a long time no one spoke. The air felt heavy with the weight of choice, of history, of blood that could not be denied. Finally, Nantan said, "We camp by the river tonight. We will leave at sunrise. If the boy stays, so be it. If he comes, he will ride beside me." He gave a respectful nod to Clara and turned his horse. The other riders followed, silent as ghosts. When they disappeared beyond the ridge, Clara sank to her knees, clutching her chest. Kohana stood beside her, watching the horizon with wide eyes. "Mama," he said quietly. "Do they hate me?" She pulled him close. "No, my love. They came because they remember you." He leaned into her, whispering, "Do I have to go?" Clara's heart ached. "You don't have to do anything, not until you're ready." That night, as the desert stars lit up the black sky, Clara sat by the fire, watching Kohana sleep. His little hand rested on the carved horse Taza had once made for her. She didn't know what the morning would bring, whether he would choose her world or his father's. But as she looked at his peaceful face, she realized something. Perhaps he wasn't meant to choose either. Perhaps he was meant to unite them. In the distance, she saw faint firelight flickering where the Apache camped by the river. The same flames her lover's spirit once sat beside. Clara whispered into the night, her voice trembling but steady. "Watch over him. Taza, your son is the bridge between us, and far off." The wind shifted, carrying with it a whisper in Apache that only her heart understood. "He carries my spirit and your courage. Together, he will be more than either of us alone." The desert sun beat down mercilessly, turning the ground into a shimmering sheet of heat. Clara tightened her grip on Kohana's hand as she stepped outside the mission. Her heart sank at the sight of the approaching dust clouds. This time, it was not her father's people nor wandering travelers, it was soldiers. They came in formation, the glint of rifles and bayonets catching the light. Their faces were stern, unforgiving, and cold. The settlers' whispers she had heard months ago were now embodied in these men. They had heard rumors of a surviving Apache child, Taza's son, and they would not allow such a legacy to continue unchecked. Clara stood her ground. Kohana pressed against her side. "Stay close to me," she whispered. The soldiers halted a few yards from the porch. Their captain, a tall man with sun-creased skin and icy blue eyes, dismounted. "You, woman," he barked. "We've heard of your dealings with the Apache. We know of the boy. He is coming with us." Clara's jaw tightened. "He is my son," she said firmly. "You will not touch him." The captain laughed, a low, bitter sound. "You will do as we say, or the consequences will be severe." From the back of the formation, she glimpsed a few mounted soldiers fidgeting, eyes darting nervously toward Kohana. They too had heard the stories. The child of a chief survived against all odds. Some trembled with fear, others with greed. Clara's mind raced. She had prepared for loneliness, for hardship, but not for this. And yet as she looked down at Kohana's small, trusting face, her resolve solidified. She would not surrender him. "Kohana," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "Do you understand? You must be strong. We can't let them take you." He nodded, his gray-blue eyes wide but determined. "I won't leave you, Mama." She pressed her lips to his forehead, then stood. Her hands rested on the old rifle she had carried from her father's ranch. Its weight was familiar, comforting. The soldiers might have numbers, but she had knowledge of the land, the desert, and the determination of a mother. A sudden whistle broke the tense silence. From the ridge behind the mission, dust rose again. This time Nantan and a small band of Apaches appeared. Their arrival shifted the balance. Clara felt a flicker of hope. The boy's people had come just as she had feared and hoped. The soldier's captain scowled. "What's this? More savages?" Nantan stepped forward, spear in hand, eyes locked on the captain. "He is of our blood," he said, "and of hers. He will not be taken." The soldiers hesitated. Rumors of Apache skill, vengeance, and stealth had traveled fast. Now, facing it firsthand, their confidence wavered. Clara seized the moment. "Leave us alone," she shouted, "or you'll face consequences you cannot imagine." One soldier stepped forward, defiance in his posture. Nantan's eyes met his, unflinching. The boy, Kohana, stood close to Clara, but his small hand brushed against the eagle bone pendant around her neck, a token of Taza's spirit, of courage, of legacy. The soldier laughed nervously, then glanced at the others. They muttered among themselves, uncertainty creeping into their ranks. Nantan's warriors shifted, their presence commanding. Clara realized she was not alone. She had allies, blood and spirit, standing with her. Finally, the captain spat to the side. "We will not forget this," he said, mounting his horse. "But we will leave for now." The soldiers rode away, dust swirling in their wake. Clara sank to her knees, pulling Kohana into her arms. His small body pressed against hers, heartbeat fast but steady. "Did we win?" he asked. Clara stroked his hair. "For now, my love. For now." As the sun dipped low, painting the desert gold and crimson, Clara felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. They had survived today, but tomorrow and the days after would be another fight. Yet in that moment, as Kohana's eyes met hers, she knew one thing for certain. He was theirs. to protect, to guide, and to cherish. The child of two worlds had survived the first storm, and together they would face whatever came next. The wind rose softly, carrying a faint whisper in Apache. Clara pressed the pendant close to her heart. She could feel Taza's spirit near, watching, guiding, blessing, and she vowed silently, no one would take this boy. Not soldiers, not prejudice, not even the cruel hand of fate. The desert stretched endless and golden under the early morning sun. Clara and Kohana had found a new refuge by the river, a hidden place where the Apache camped, its banks lined with willows, and the soft rush of water masking their presence. For the first time since Taza's death, Clara allowed herself to breathe fully. Kohana ran along the riverbank, laughing as he kicked at stones and chased lizards. His small hands dipped into the water, and when he splashed, droplets caught the sunlight, forming tiny rainbows. Clara watched, her heart swelling. He was a child of two worlds, free and wild, yet carrying the weight of a legacy, heavier than any adult could bear. The elders of the tribe gathered around the campfire that evening, their faces lined with wisdom and years. Nantan spoke first, telling stories of Taza's bravery and the bloodline that had survived through Kohana. Clara listened in silence, holding her son close. She could see the reverence in their eyes, the respect for the boy who carried the spirit of a chief. One of the elders, a tall woman with hair streaked with silver, stepped forward. She reached out and touched Kohana's forehead lightly. Her voice was soft but carried the weight of prophecy. The child born of two worlds, she said, will walk between fires. He will speak with the spirits of his people and with the people of the settlers. His heart will bind what others divide. He will carry the wind, swift and true, and in his steps our people will find hope. Clara's chest tightened. She remembered Taza's whispered words in the dying hours, the gentle touch of his hand, the promise he had placed in her care. Swift as the wind, he had said. And now she understood. The prophecy was not just for Kohana. It was for both of them, for the union of life, love, and legacy that had been born from loss and courage. That night, Clara placed Kohana in the small tent beside her. She traced the eagle bone pendant around her neck, feeling its warmth as if Taza himself had pressed it there. The wind watches you, my son, she whispered, and so does he. Kohana stirred, his eyes half open, and murmured something she did not understand. She bent closer. The child hears him, she said softly, awe filling her voice. He feels the spirit. Days turned into weeks. Clara taught Kohana both the Apache ways and the teachings she had learned from her own people, how to read the stars, listen to the wind, and tend to the land. He was a quick learner, curious and fearless, yet gentle with the animals and reverent to the river and trees. He spoke Apache as naturally as English, weaving them together like threads of a tapestry. One evening, she found him standing at the edge of the river, staring into the current. She approached quietly. "What do you see, Kohana?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes bright. "I see Taza," he said simply. "He sings to me in the wind." Clara's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling. She had prayed that Taza's spirit would guide him, but hearing her son speak it aloud brought a surge of both sorrow and joy. "You carry him in your heart," she whispered, "and he carries you." That night, under a sky so clear the stars seemed to burn closer to the earth, Clara felt a peace she hadn't known since before the war. For the first time, she understood that Kohana was not just her son, but a bridge between the living and the departed, between cultures, between the past and the future. The wind rose softly, whispering through the willows. Clara closed her eyes, listening. It spoke of hope, of survival, of love that refused to die. She pressed the eagle bone pendant to her lips. "Taza," she whispered, "he is yours. Your spirit lives on through him." And far above, where the desert met the horizon, the wind answered, carrying the prophecy across the land. The child of two worlds would live, the tribe would endure, and the promise made in the shadow of death would bloom into life. Swift as the wind, the desert had changed with the seasons, but some things endured, like the river that cut through the valley, the mountains that framed the horizon, and the wind that whispered secrets across the sand. Clara stood at the edge of the camp, Kohana running ahead of her, his laughter echoing through the canyons. The boy had grown fast, his bronze skin kissed by the sun, his gray-blue eyes sharp and thoughtful. He carried himself with a confidence that belied his years, moving as if the land itself guided his steps. He spoke Apache fluently now, weaving his father's tongue with the language of his mother. The elders smiled at him, seeing in his movements the spirit of Taza, the strength of the White Mountain Apache. Clara watched him, a mixture of awe and love filling her chest. She had carried him in her body, nourished him, taught him, and protected him from a world that did not always welcome difference, and yet she knew he was no longer hers alone. He was the living bridge between two worlds, a legacy of life, courage, and love that refused to be forgotten. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Nantan approached the campfire. Kohana ran to him immediately, and the warriors nodded respectfully to Clara, their faces solemn but warm. "He is ready," Nantan said quietly. "The boy has learned our ways, but he also carries yours. Soon he will journey with us, learn from the elders, and take his place among the tribe. But his heart will always carry you." Clara felt a lump in her throat. "I know," she whispered. "And I will be here when he returns. No matter what, he will always have a home with me." Kohana turned to her, eyes bright. "Mama, I want to see the places Papa loved," he said. "I want to hear the songs of our people. I want to know both worlds so I can be strong like him." Tears slipped down Clara's cheeks. She pressed the eagle bone pendant against her heart and smiled. "Then go, my son. Learn everything. And never forget that you are loved by both worlds and by me." That night, under a sky blanketed with stars, the tribe prepared for the journey ahead. Kohana's small bag was packed with necessities, his favorite carved horse and the pendant Taza had given his mother. He hugged Clara tightly, feeling the warmth and strength of her embrace. "Promise me you'll be brave," she whispered, brushing his hair from his forehead. "I promise," he said, gripping her hand. "I'll carry you and Papa with me." As the first light of dawn touched the desert, the tribe mounted their horses. Kohana rode beside Nantan, his small hands gripping the reins, his eyes scanning the horizon. Clara stood at the riverbank, the wind tugging gently at her hair, carrying the scent of sage and sand. The riders moved gracefully through the valley, disappearing into the morning haze. Clara watched until the last figure vanished. Then she knelt, pressing her hands to the earth. "You live," she whispered to Taza's spirit. "Through him you live. Your name, your people, your courage, they continue." The wind stirred, brushing against her cheeks like a lover's touch. She smiled through her tears, feeling Taza's presence, the legacy he had entrusted to her, and the promise of the child who would carry both of their worlds forward. Seasons passed, and Clara remained by the river, tending the mission and the small patch of land she called home. She heard stories carried by wandering travelers of a boy, swift as the wind, who rode with a band of Apache and bridged two worlds with wisdom beyond his years. And in the quiet moments, when the sun sank behind the mountains and the desert glowed golden, Clara would close her eyes and feel Kohana's heartbeat in hers. She knew he was safe. She knew he was loved. She knew that the promise made in the shadow of death had blossomed into life. The eagle bone pendant gleamed against her chest, a symbol of what had been lost and what had been saved. Through the desert, through the hardships, through the prejudice and fear, life had endured, love had endured. And the legacy of Chief Taza, the warrior, the father, the man who had begged for his seed to live on, endured, carried in the heart and spirit of his son. Kohana, the desert wind whispered across the canyon, swift and sure, as if carrying a message across time. The past lives in the present. The legacy lives on, and hope is eternal. Clara smiled, feeling both sorrow and joy, and whispered into the wind, "Go, my son. Carry us with you. Carry the world with you." And with that, the story of Taza, Clara, and their child became legend, a tale of courage, love, and the enduring power of legacy.